I'm also very excited to be kicking this off. I'm really looking forward to our other speakers. So this will be a pretty quick talk, but I do want to start by asking who I'm talking to. So actually, this is not a multiple choice question. You can raise your hand multiple times, but who in the audience is in a business function primarily in their company? Okay, great. And how about something that starts with data? Data engineering, data analysis, data science? Okay. How many people face customers every day and communicate with customers in what they do? All right. I actually think there were more for that last one than for the other two, which is really surprising and great. And that's something that's good about this community, which is that people bring a lot of depth in different areas to the same place. So I think I've got something for everybody, although it's a short talk. And the theme I'm going to be browbeating about is communication. How do we do communication? What are the new opportunities for analyzing communication? And even if you don't care as much about communicating with customers as I do, but it looks like probably you do, there should be something to get out of this. So I want to start with the reason I am obsessed with how organizations communicate with their customers. I think that we're living through a pretty special moment economically, maybe like 30 years of moments, but things are changing very rapidly in that the old justification for starting a firm was more or less to organize a bunch of production apparatus and bring some product to market, and usually to have a more transactional relationship, bring something that's well understood and bring it to people who you have a sort of transactional relationship with in buying that product. And the internet is really flipping that, because the key opportunity is how much we can know about and how much we can communicate with our customers. And that means that the most valuable asset isn't really the production assets, which are being commoditized and modularized in a lot of directions, but the customer relationships themselves. And it's becoming most important that companies can retain and expand and use those customer relationships to launch the next important thing, because the world's changing very fast. So it's not a surprise, given those dynamics, that we have a lot of new technology for communicating with customers. So probably many people have adopted new technology about this in the last 2 or 3 years. So we have fast-growing companies from in your team chat, Slack, and in-application chat, old school email or ticket-based systems like Zendesk and Salesforce. We have systems for communities like Discourse or Khoros. We have public forums, so Twitter, as Matt's accepting questions on, or review sites like Amazon or Google. There are many, many places that you as a consumer could give unstructured information and feedback and requests to a company that you do business with, or that you might receive it as a company. So with all of these new ways of talking to customers, I would imagine that all of us feel really listened to, right? Like people feel like their needs are responded to very quickly. That's actually not the case in most surveys and in most interactions, that these are not driving people towards a feeling of having a more authentic relationship. And I think the reason is pretty simple. We experience this as individuals, but companies experience it too. The ways we can communicate are expanding way faster than our ability to listen and understand and to think seriously about what's being said. And I think something that really drives this home in your business life is if you compare what's happening in your marketing stack when someone clicks on your website versus what's happening in your customer experience when somebody actually takes time to have a 30-minute conversation with a customer service rep. So if you have a stray click or even a mouse gesture on your website, it might set off sort of a Swiss watch chain reaction about identifying what this behavior might indicate about you as an individual. And but if that, and we're very good at measuring these funnels that we've set up. If you designed your website to ask people certain questions and filter them through them, then you will develop some understanding aligned with those questions. But if people step outside your funnel to actually communicate with you in a more robust way, and you have a 30-minute conversation with them, the state of the art for that is kind of a conversation happened. Or maybe a conversation happened and it was a feature request. But it might be feature request number 1064 this week. And it's kind of crazy that we're accumulating these large, dark volumes of data that people are taking time to give a lot of information to companies that they're not really able to make part of anything except the most immediate conversation with that person. Our view is basically to break through that barrier and to make some of this opaque information easier to deal with. And what you're seeing here is kind of how Frame sees a conversation. So on the left is the transcript faithfully imported from voice or chat or any kind of format that accepts natural language communication with a customer. And on the right, what you have is the metadata that we're extracting from it. So some of this is the same sort of stuff you have in marketing data. Who is this user? How do they fit into our existing segmentation? What's the metadata that is associated with leading to this conversation? But also, and the sort of the key property is we've broken up the content of that conversation into small semantic chunks and analyzed it and labeled it. And some of that is pre-built models about engagement or detecting problem statements or domain-specific annotations like intents from a travel site. And some of it is things, and what I'll spend most of my time talking about are topics that are very specific to one company's operations that they can use to answer questions and to take action. So when you get enough of these together, then it opens up these new possibilities for reasoning about how your customers are talking to you and a more substantive way of reasoning about it. So what you're seeing here, every point here is actually more or less a sentence from an individual delivered to, in this case, it's a SaaS company that does software that handles accounting, among other things. And we're zooming in here on one subsection. The points are plotted in a semantic embedding, which I'm sure a lot of you know about, and I'll say a little bit more about later, that puts sentences that are close to each other, that are similar to each other, close to each other. And they're flashing based on the timing of their arrival. And what this is kind of illustrating, we were able to use this data behind this to identify seasonal trends in what kinds of questions people were asking. Maybe not a surprise in retrospect. People have fiscal years and accounting cycles that they have to go through. They ask certain things at certain times. But being able to measure it and identify it as a priority was a new thing for the people we were working with, and they were able to design a process around making services and functionality for the specific types of things that were going to come up at a specific time more available at that moment. So these are the kinds of things you can do when you break into understanding the surface of communication with your customers, because it's a system of last resort. When your other systems don't work, this is where they come. So because this is data-driven, I'm going to dive a little bit into the technology behind this. And this is another place where we're just really at this unique time. So you're going to hear from Dr. Gary Marcus later on today. I agree with him. I don't know if he'll talk about this, but I agree that deep learning is not about to give us generalized intelligence, but it has really fundamentally changed the way that we interact with unstructured data. It's given us a lot of opportunities to apply more transparent techniques after the fact, after using deep learning to interpret this data. So in natural language processing, the top layer here is, we're no longer talking about a single model, but a stack of models that are used to bring information from different data sets to bear in understanding the context of your communication. So on the wide end of the stack, we've got generalized language models. So terrific research teams, some of them here in this city, training on multi-language corpuses, millions of documents, just fundamentals of how humans express themselves in text and in speech. Then at the next layer, those models don't necessarily do a good job at capturing the distinctions between how people talk, for example, in the medical field versus somewhere else. So your discussion of what a member is, or what constitutes an emergency or a provider of services means something very different, very specific in a medical context than elsewhere. You guys hearing me now? Thanks for the heads up. So to that extent that, we specialize language, we're very good at it as humans, specializing languages to the tasks that we have at hand. And it's more possible than ever, even with limited data sets, to specialize our models to those same domains. So one of the key things that we're able to do is a last mile adaptation of these general language models to domain-specific contexts. And then finally, with the data itself, what are your customers actually telling you? How can we look at the density structure of that data? What are the common topics? What's the noise? Where are the things that are coming up more often? And pick out themes that are worth exploring further. So all of that is data that doesn't require any additional, all of that is analysis that doesn't require any additional annotation. But it provides a backbone along which we can make a much more accelerated use, a much efficient use of the time that you do want to spend annotating your data, so the supervised part of the training. So Frame comes pre-built with a lot of emotion and sentiment models, some pre-trained intents for specific industries, but the real thing that unlocks value in understanding your users is being able to train custom models, things that reflect areas that are important to your business specifically. And the work that we've already done in structuring an understanding of the language before you label anything makes the labeling process there much faster. So it's very quick to come from a already clustered set of data where you already have some key themes, identify within that clustering themes that are relevant to a particular query. So this is actually data from a public community site for a company that we interact with frequently, Gainsight. And here somebody might come in with a query about surveys. What are customers in our community saying about our survey features? And we can easily zoom in and light those up and identify some sentences that form a likely sort of seed for a training set about detecting that more broadly and more accurately. And then jump into an active learning loop where we're able not to label individual items at a time, but to label whole sets, because again, knowledge about the structure of this language allows us to cluster and to present to a labeler a set of things that they can probably rapidly identify as all belonging to a group or all not belonging to a group. And we found that this method, at the same accuracy, improves labeling speed by 4x or more. And then as soon as that's done, we can apply that retroactively. And instead of waiting for new data to come in, now that we're, for example, manually labeling data, we can go back to historic data and find these themes in the past and rapidly be exploring trends in them, how they correlate with other items of interest, and so on. So when you take those things together, it presents this other kinds of opportunity, which is a more organizational opportunity about how different teams at your organization use data. So if you've now reduced the barrier of doing a data analysis, it's no longer a ticket that takes 2 weeks for a data team to help you interact with. It's now something that's a 15-minute research project for any stakeholder that's given access to this data. You start being able to get labels and use cases from a much wider swath of the company. And that's one of the things that I'm most excited about, because I think data democratization is a key theme that's been successful for a lot of different fields. I think we have a potential to do that with the natural language that comes into companies. I'm going to use that to make my one sort of philosophical digression here before stepping off, because I can see that we're running out of time here. But I think, when you look at what opportunity that provides to an organization, I think it provides a little bit of nuance or an opportunity to add some nuance to how we think about the role AI plays in industry and in enterprise. So I think a lot of times the discourse around AI sways on one side from like, AI is the gears in Charlie Chaplin's factory in modern times, and we're all going to be caught inside a black box model that we don't understand, sort of at the mercy of the decisions being made by these systems. And that's sort of a view that people with, in my opinion, some justified concerns about social change will bring forward. Or people like me who are authoring AI solutions might also present this view that AI can be this bicycle of the mind, and that we're going to extend human ability to reason about data by having these new tools. I think the truth is both kind of like very transformative and a little bit more mundane, is that it's more of a communication medium. So when I showed the stack of models that we use, that stack of unstructured models was a way for knowledge about human usage of language to be communicated, but from multiple data sets into an increasingly granular and specific context. And when I showed this pipeline where we can have stakeholders who aren't necessarily trained in AI very rapidly explore models and label large sets of data, then we're talking about being able to gather use cases from a much wider group of people. So I tend to think of AI tools, especially for the enterprise, as being a medium for communication of knowledge and expertise. And I think that'll give a lot better reflexes about what AI can do and what makes it successful. And one of those things that makes it successful, as we've discovered with a lot of communication media, is allowing more people to get involved. So bringing that back to our goal of understanding our customers, what we really want to be able to show is have people who care about different things at the company be able to explore how customer communication supports or changes their beliefs about what they're doing. So every feature release, what does that change about how customers are talking to us? Every churn or detractor, can we understand why people are leaving our system? Oftentimes they tell us, but we go and try to reproduce it with surveys after the fact instead of looking at what they've already said. Can we look at every user demographic? Like, are we stuck only looking at like the 3 most common cohorts, or can we understand that we're actually kind of torturing a small set of our users because they're in the minority? Or every employee's impact. Are we actually thinking about how, and can we communicate inside our organization, how each person's work contributes to the experience that we're promising our customers? So if you have one practical takeaway from this, if you're interested in this problem, here's some of building a holistic understanding of your customer communication. You can walk away with these 3 questions to ask yourself, and I think it'll lead to some of the same questions we asked. What is driving your communication effort and your customers? It's easy to kind of think about the cost center of talking to customers and how much effort you're spending, but what about the effort they're spending? What's driving that effort? What's driving their emotional engagement and their satisfaction? Do you really know and can categorize what makes people happy or sad when they come through a user experience with you? And then finally, how would you find out something you didn't know? Like, what's the time cycle? Who has to know what when in order for me to realize something should be on my radar that isn't? So with that, I've given you some questions, and now you can hand some over to me. Okay.
Want to give us a sense of the business side of things? Who's a good customer?
Great. So we work with on a technical level, we work with everything from rapidly growing startups to large enterprises. We have 3 publicly traded companies that we work with right now, some in highly regulated industries. So we've done everything from HIPAA compliant deployments to different kinds of security environments. We're really focused on companies that have expanding and fragmented communication surfaces. We see that companies of any particular size are likely to have lots of ways of talking to their customers, but that information gets highly siloed, and they don't really have a way of reasoning about their customer communication surface as a whole. So if you've ever had a thought like this, like, oh man, this one team knew that a certain type of customer was going through this, and this other team could have acted but didn't know about it, that's the kind of problem that we're well prepared to solve.
Great. There's one question here. Oh yeah, we have this fancy...
this fancy catch box, so I'm going to throw it at you. Don't be alarmed.
If you have a question, just raise your hand.
Just keep it in the black part right there.
Great presentation, thank you. Can you talk a little to us about your sales cycle? Who are you selling the solution to in enterprises, and how are you guys dealing with enterprise adoption?
Yeah, so it's a very interesting thing because the world we're selling into is transforming. We see more and more companies adopting a customer experience operations team and or like a chief customer officer, heads of customer success, and that this is becoming a technical role. Historically, customer success is this cost center. It's becoming recognized that it's a driver of revenue, and that every communication is an opportunity to improve your revenue picture. And so as that happens, people are becoming more technical, more data oriented, and have more resources. So but they're also in shift. So typically it's a leader in the customer success team that is best suited to evaluate us and to kind of look at they're the ones who know most about the data, and they have the most problems that they wish they have insights that they wish they could confirm. They wish they could quantify them, and a lot of times that's where the initial use cases reside. And then over time, after solving some of their problems, we are able to help them solve other teams' problems around the organization.
Hi, do you have any particular CRMs do you work with specifically?
So pretty much everyone, we've built our system to be very extensible. So we've worked with everybody that I know of except customer at this point, and I'm dying to work with them because they're here in New York. And if there's anybody from customer, please let's talk. But we've, especially Salesforce is of course the elephant in the room that we interact with constantly throughout the day.
Good. One more. Nice throw.
Cool. Thanks for the talk. It was great. I was interested in your discussion around who's around allowing stakeholders to specify AI specifically. So you'll go to a customer, they have specific ways of referring to things, so do their customers. It seems like your position is allow the stakeholder to specify the models themselves. What I wonder though is, if you just thought about it at all or found any success in this, is it possible that industries themselves, that is specific verticals, have specific ways of referring to things, and you can scale those models within the verticals and specify those models yourself rather than like creating tooling specifically for what often is a non-technical user?
That's a great question, and absolutely, I kind of glanced over this, but we do have pre-built model sets for certain domains, and that's something that we're pretty excited about extending because there is an opportunity for sort of an economy of scale of doing a lot of that work. But I think the catch to that is, I mean, basically, we're very invested in this notion of AI that's localized to the individual and the firm. We think that a lot of the opportunities for aggregating data and for doing analyses of those kinds, they will be used, but eventually they'll be commoditized. They'll be part of the stack as well. And we actually think that the companies we work with should be much more careful with their data. That's one of the reasons we deploy on-prem. We have completely siloed interactions with different customer sets because, frankly, your communication with your customers, even if people aren't using it right now, but it's an incredibly valuable asset, and you should use it to expand your business, and we should build models that are custom to it.
Appreciate it.
Thanks, Matt.